There's always that one voice in the crowd. Jesus is preaching to thousands, the kind of crowd that surges like water, pressing close, trampling each other to get a little closer to the fire of his words. He's teaching about eternal things, about fear and faith and the soul. And right in the middle of this spirit-filled moment, a man stands up and interrupts, not with prayer, not to offer a confession, but for a family lawsuit. "Teacher," he says, "tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And you can still almost hear the disciples groan because this man has just outed himself. He thinks Jesus is a divine accountant, that Jesus came with spreadsheets and settlements. But friends, Jesus did not come to pad your portfolio. He came to transform your soul. So Jesus turns, not just to the man, but to every one of us who's ever confused wealth with worth, savings with safety, or possessions with peace. And Jesus says, watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of greed, because life, real life, does not consist in the abundance of things. Now, Jesus isn't speaking Greek in this moment, but the gospel writer is. And the word the gospel writer uses for life is Zoe. Zoe is not just breath in your lungs, it's deep life. Zoe is the kind of life that pulses with purpose. Zoe is the kind of life that Jesus came to bring. Jesus called it abundant life. And my friends, you want that life. I want that life. We all want that life. But here's the tension. What if the life Jesus wants to give you will cost you the life you're trying to build for yourself right now? What if the life Jesus is offering you can't live in the same barn as your curated, comfort-first life that you've been living and building? This is the line that cuts deeply through every Christian heart. Because when Jesus calls us, He's not offering upgrades, He's offering God's kind of abundance. He's offering wholeness. And you can't say yes to that while still clutching your personal plans. Jesus desperately wants us to get this, and so He does what He does. He tells a story. He tells a story about a man who already had plenty, not just a little bit extra, but more than enough. So then this guy who has all this stuff one year has this bumper crop that's so big he ran out of room on his farm. It's so big he didn't even have barns big enough to hold it. And so he thought to himself, what should I do? And you should stop and notice there. He didn't say, who could I bless? He didn't say, what is it that God might be up to by giving me this? No, he says, what shall I do? What shall I do with my crops, with my grain, with my surplus? And what he decides to do is draft a blueprint for his own salvation. He says, I'll tear down my barns, I'll build bigger ones, I'll store it all up, and then I'll tell myself, self, you've done really well. Rest now, eat, drink, and be merry. But then Jesus, with the ache of heaven in his voice, says, you fool. Not because the man was rich, it was actually the opposite. He says this because he knows the man's soul was actually starving. Because he knows the man has mistaken stockpiles for security. Because he knows these barns that this man built to be his fortress will actually become his tomb. This, Jesus says, is what happens when you fill your barns with self and not with God. And we need to pause there for a moment, because this parable isn't just about grain. It was always meant to be about more than that. It certainly is for us. This parable is about anything we store up and hold back, assuming that our safety lives in the silo. Anything. So if you're paying attention right now, and if you're paying attention prayerfully, this should be beginning to cut at your soul. Because what are you storing? What are you filling your barns up with right now? Because Jesus isn't just speaking to that man in the crowd, he's speaking to every single one of us who's ever confused getting ahead with the life that is truly life. He's speaking to everyone who's mistaken full closets for full hearts. He's speaking to everyone who's waiting to be generous someday, when the kids are older, when the mortgage is paid, or when the time is right. And to all of us and to all of them, Jesus is whispering, I have something better for you than you have for yourself. But you can't have it if your soul is locked behind the doors of your own barn. And before we shake our heads at that man in the parable, we need to take a look in the mirror, because his blueprint for salvation, it's not that different from ours. I mean, this guy builds barns, we build bank accounts and backup plans and gated lives. His mistake wasn't foreign to us, it's familiar. Which brings us to where we live now. Because this next part, it's not ancient history. It's Tuesday afternoon in America. We all say it, right? Money can't buy happiness. But most of us say it with our fingers crossed, because deep down we're still just like Tevier from Fiddler on the Roof, who, when he was told money is the world's curse, replied, "May the Lord smite me with it and I never recover." It's not that we want to worship money. We just want to use it responsibly. We'll use it and then we'll give later. We'll share later. But for now, we'd like just enough to breathe easy, to retire early, and maybe build a little cabin for relaxation where nobody can touch all that we've made possible. And actually, this is the vibe that I got from the comment section of an article I read recently about lottery winners. The article told about all the usual cautionary tales you've heard of, lottery winners who eventually lose everything. The money, their families are torn apart, their friendships are spoiled, and yet the comments, the people who read the article, were actually still full of dreams. One person said, "If I win, I'll buy a mountain and live alone there." And another one said, "If I win, I'll sit in a bathtub full of cash, smoking a cigar, sipping champagne, and when people ask me for money, I'll simply send them a photo of me." And these people thought they were being funny, but there's something hauntingly true beneath that humor. It's the instinct to isolate, the instinct to protect, to build bigger barns and fill them only with ourselves. And Jesus has already warned us where that road leads. And interestingly enough, so does neuroscience. Michael Norton, a Harvard professor in Harvard Business School, studied the connection between money and happiness, and his conclusion was, yes, money can buy happiness, but only if you spend it on someone else. In one experiment, participants received money and half were told to spend it on themselves and the other half were told to spend it on someone else. And the result was those who spent the money on themselves felt no real change. But those who gave it away, they were happier every single time. It didn't matter whether they bought coffee for someone or medicine. What mattered was that the money became a gift. It was a connection. It was a moment of grace. And the joy wasn't just emotional, it was chemical. The brain released oxytocin, the bonding hormone, in the giver and in the receiver and in the person who was witnessing the act, which means your generosity has the potential to bless 3 souls all at once, yours included. And isn't that what Jesus was getting at all along? That if you want to find life, real life, you don't store it, you share it. And that's what the early church did. When the Holy Spirit fell at Pentecost, they didn't build towers or write creeds. They shared. They broke bread. They sold what they had and gave it to those in need. Because when the Spirit moves, your barn doesn't get bigger, your table does. So let's be clear. Jesus isn't just giving us a moral lesson here or a neuroscience footnote. Jesus is holding up a mirror. He's telling a story that ends in a kind of death, not a physical one, but a spiritual one that forces us to ask, what kind of life are we really living if it's all about us? What happens to a soul that builds walls instead of tables? This is where Jesus is taking us next. The man in the story doesn't seem wicked. He doesn't harm his workers. He doesn't mock God. He's just successful. He's a successful businessman. And he's alone. His land yields plenty. His barns overflow. And when he finally asks a question, he asks it only to himself. What shall I do? And so then in response, he drafts a solo plan and gives a speech to his own soul. He's the keynote speaker at the event, and he's addressing an audience of one, of I, me, myself, and my. I, me, me, me. The rich man throws a party, and only his ego is invited. And that's the real tragedy, because somewhere nearby, there are workers who gathered that grain. And they have families who could use just a little bit more. There are children who are falling asleep to the sound of their own empty stomachs. But they're not part of this guy's plan. They never make it into his story because he never opens the barn, and Jesus says, "You are a fool." Not because he's wealthy, but because he thought wealth was equal to life. Because he mistook ownership for joy, because he prepared a feast that no one else would ever get to taste. And God says, tonight, your soul will be required of you. And the Greek word there means demanded back, as if his soul was never really his to keep in the first place, as if it was on loan and now the loan is due. And the question that follows is haunting. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself then? Because this is what happens, Jesus says, when you store up treasure for yourself, but you're not rich toward God. And so, my friends, let me ask you this, and let me ask you as plainly and pastorally as I can. What is it that you're building? Because you can easily win the world and lose your soul. Because you can curate comfort and still miss joy. Because you can build a barn or you can set a table. So many of us say we're going to be generous when we have more, but what if the act of generosity is what makes more in us and of us? So many of us intend to share what we have someday, but you know, barns built for someday rarely get unlocked. And so don't wait. Don't wait until your barn is bursting to be generous. Don't wait until your calendar clears to give of your time. And don't wait until you have it all figured out to say yes to the grace of God. Because one day, your soul will be asked for. And the question that will come when that day comes won't be, how big was your barn? It will be, who exactly did you feed with it?